Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. This is really good. So I hope you enjoyed the lunch. Yes. And we say hi to everybody online. I don't know who's there, but we have people watching and joining online through the live stream. So that's always a good addition. So this is the second presentation of this particular seminar, and I'm calling this The Root of Conflict and the Key to Peace and Reconciliation. So we're covering quite a lot of ground here, but as I emphasized, the first session looked at something of an ideal, you could say, especially when we talked about personal development, marriage and family, these ideas. Reality, of course, of our world is tragically different. It's a world of conflict, undoubtedly, and we don't need reminding of that. We're faced with that every day through our news media and personal experiences too. We have two purposes in life. This is Father Moon speaking in the 1970s. He said there, we have two purposes in our life. One is the purpose of our own lives. The other is the purpose of our lives in relation to others. So to our family, to our nation, to the whole world. There must be balance between these. And you can see how this fits in with our talk earlier. If too much stress is placed on individualism, then collective virtues are lost. That is love of the nation, brotherhood of the people, family integrity, relationships between parents and children, and finally, even the value of individuals themselves. It gets lost. So, sometimes we might wonder, what is the guiding philosophy of our current society in the UK, for example? It might be, if it's not too harsh, to conclude that it's self-centered individualism. It's encouraging people to, of course everybody wants and needs to get on in life, but what element of contributing to a wider whole is emphasized, and it doesn't stop a lot of good people doing a lot of good things, right? I think it's one thing we can be proud of for this country. It's charitable work, the people who feel called to do help for others and volunteerism and this kind of thing. So there's that side too. So peace is living for the sake of others. It involves working this important relationship in a good way. And we've talked about the pair system and how those relationships should work. And then I can say that I exist to benefit the whole. It's not just for me that I'm here. So there's some higher purpose to my life. And having that thought makes our approach to life different. Here, I've just represented an individual is part of the whole group of society or people in the nation. And if that individual is living for the whole, then what happens naturally is that the whole supports that individual. And we'll see that a person feels naturally part of that, and they have a stake in that community and that society. But where people are living a more self-centered life and following this philosophy of self-centered individualism, then it's almost like they see themselves as outside of the whole. There's everybody else out there or over there, and there's me, and I'm kind of expecting the whole to support me and help me. So this kind of way of life is ultimately unhelpful to society as a whole and also to the individual. It really doesn't help. Does everybody follow that point? So this is where understanding these two purposes is very important. They work well in everything in the natural world. You'll find there are two purposes. There are a balance. This means in any ecosystem, for example, no one species will naturally become extinct. They'll find a way to balance and to create harmony and be part of that complex whole. Here's Father Moon talking in the 1970s, and he's mentioning how ideologies have often justified and even encouraged conflict as part of their outlook and their philosophy. According to the logic of communism, there will be constant struggles as long as there are classes of people. But in our ideology, that's in unificationism or UPF understanding, there are no class differences but only family relationships. Here, there is no discrimination. There are no people above or below, but only the relationship between parents and children providing order in the family. And going on to talk about communism, he said, according to communist ideology, mine is mine and yours is mine. On our part, we must think mine is yours and yours is the nations and the nations is the world's and the world's is God's and God's is mine. So it's a much more virtuous circle of thinking of which we are a part. And he said the spirit of unificationism or unification must be greater than the power of communism in practice, in hope, and in ideals. Because the communist message was also one of creating an ideal society, right? And where everybody is equal, everybody's taken care of, and we live as brothers and sisters. But it was a reality that was unable to achieve, or they could not achieve, because of limitations in the ideology itself. So Father Moon initiated a critique and counter-proposal to Marxist-Leninism back in the 70s, and this had a great impact in many countries, and also made a lot of enemies, as you can imagine, right? Because this is the first time somebody from such a religious point of view was really analyzing what is wrong with such atheistic, materialistic ideologies and how they cannot bring the peaceful, ideal world that they promise. So that was very powerful and amazing tool. So the reality of human nature is this. We have some sort of selfish nature, which is quite well developed in each person. And also everybody has an original nature. Some people it's much stronger. It's kind of undeveloped in many people. So there's a good aspect and a bad aspect. We call it the conflicted self, right? And it is a kind of domain of many paths of faith, of many religions, to explore this and try to find a way out of this inner conflict. Here are some quotations from different world faiths. Here in Sikhism, in the Adi Granth, it said, "Whoever proclaims himself good, no, goodness approaches him not." So these Holy Scriptures always have quite a poetic way of putting things, right? But of course, that's saying something which is, gives you a wry smile, really. As soon as you think I'm good and state that, you're probably not, actually, right? So it's a dangerous thing to do. Here in Hinduism, the mind is twofold, the pure and also the impure. Even in Native American religion, the Mohawk tradition says every person has both a bad heart and a good heart. This is, very simply put, but it's recognizing something about our human condition. And in Christianity, you have the writings of St. Paul, a saved Christian, an amazing experience to transform him from a persecutor of early Christians to being the most devoted missionary of early Christianity. But he said, "I do not do the good that I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do." In other words, just willing it isn't enough, even for me. I'm sure he was a very good man, very saintly man, but he was troubled by something. We don't know what it was. Maybe his inability to love a certain type of person, or to discipline himself in some way and overcome his more self-centered desires. Anyway, he struggled with this, and if you read the book of Romans, you'll find a lot about that. So there's conflict in the human mind. This is our current condition. I would say not our original condition. Human beings were not designed to have it this way, but this is how it has come about, and this is what we need to get away from. So I searched the internet for the most conflicted-looking person, and this was the poor person that I found. I don't know who he is, right? Because we have certain selfish thoughts, words, actions, things where the body is immediately dominating, and that's pulling us towards an evil direction, we can say, in religious terms. But also, we can have unselfish thoughts, words, and actions based on those, where our original mind is leading us, this conscience is leading us, and this good mind, and it's towards goodness. So we're somewhere trapped between being pulled both ways, right? And you see it even in cartoon culture, right? There's a little angel on one shoulder, a little devil on the other shoulder, kind of whispering things to a person. So, but it's such a reality that we can make cartoons out of it, that people know. And unless you're free of this, I don't know, right? I might be wrong, pardon. So there's a battle going on inside the mind of each person. It's this inner battle or struggle which then manifests in conflicts in the family. This causes somebody to hurt another person without really intending or meaning to do it, but they do it. A person, perhaps making up lies to justify their behavior or to cover their misdeeds. These kind of things are coming from that self-centered, not so good side of the mind, right? And it emerges as conflict in the family, and then in society, and then in the world. So all the struggles that we see on the wider stage are coming from individuals, actually, because that individual has some problem or some evil intention or something that they can't control in themselves. Then it's getting multiplied and manifested. Does that make sense? Yes, because society is made up of individuals. It's the quality of those individuals. This is what we talked about earlier. It depends on that, the integrity of each person. And so we need to get back to that. So the origin of conflict, most cultures have some story or myth which helps them understand and explain to their children, I suppose, where these things come from, because they're going to meet this ugly side of human nature sometime in their life, right? Although I would be careful myself about calling it human nature. I would call it like a fallen or deviated human nature. It's not original human nature. And that's an important difference. So we get myths containing very deep insights, and that's the nature of myth, isn't it? Sometimes there's a truth wrapped up there in a story. And we get intuition about the human condition, and within the metaphorical language and the stories themselves, and that's a picture of the Adam and Eve story in the Bible, which is very universal, actually, very known around the world. But it's still wrapped up in a story and maybe not explaining everything. That's what we're after. And this is what Father Moon was after in his young life, to really understand and get to the root of this. He fought spiritually through his prayer and study about 7 years. A lonely journey to try to get to the bottom of this. He felt, if I'm going to be successful in my work, I have to know this. So here are some insights, again, from around the world's religions, right? You know the pattern here now, right? This is the Uttaranga Sutra, which is from the Jain religion. Any Jains here today? No. But you might know somebody from the Jain faith, yes? Last seminar that we had, there was a lady sitting in the front here, very beautiful. lady, right, from that tradition. And it says there, it is better to die than to indulge in partaking of forbidden lustful pleasure. Amen. That's quite strong, isn't it, right? What about the Dhammapada as a Buddhist text? It says, the man who goes to the wife of another, commits adultery, digs up the very roots of life. It's very damaging. It's going right down to the root and stirring something up. Here in the Holy Quran, do not come near adultery, for it is a shameful deed and evil, opening the road to other evils. Here's Judaism, with a commentary that you get in the Talmud on the original text, and this is the debates of the rabbis from Abbot to Rabbi Nathan. What was the wicked serpent? You have to know the Genesis story. Everybody familiar with that? Yeah. You know, there's a serpent and a tree with fruit and etc. Right? What was the wicked serpent contemplating at that time? He thought, I shall go and kill Adam and wed his wife, and I shall be king over the whole world. A way of dominating people. But do people use that in society, in kind of dictators? And, you know, they use this method to get a hold of people, to threaten to expose people's infidelities for loyalty. You know, they are, you know, using this kind of thinking and practice. Here is again Hinduism, the Mahabharata. I'm just quoting them, right? Formerly all creatures were virtuous, means sometime originally, right? And by themselves they obtained divinity. Then women who had been virtuous became wicked witches, and Brahma filled them with wanton desires, which they in turn inspired in men. He created anger, and henceforth all creatures were born in the power of desire and anger. Wow. But my point here is this is, it's a very common theme, isn't it? Right? That's going on here. And here in Holy Quran, O children of Adam, let not Satan seduce you in the same manner as he got your parents out of the garden. It's talking about that same story. Stripping them of their clothing in order to expose their private parts. Wow. And then you've got Sikhism. Sexual desire is the window, pain and pleasure are the gatekeepers, virtue and sin are the gates. Kind of two ways to go, right? And here again is St. Paul in 1 Corinthians. Flee from sexual immorality. He who sins sexually sins against his own body. So you're violating that precious temple. You're going against the kind of making that foundation of peace that we talked about in the individual, and you will trouble your mind as well, so as well as harming other people. So if we go back to that Genesis story that we referred to, it has God giving to our first ancestors, named Adam and Eve, in this Garden of Eden ideal world, kind of original heaven or paradise setting, a commandment. They could eat of the fruit of any tree in the garden except one of those two that was in the center, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they are told, do not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die. The prohibition is death. Turns out we can see it's not physical death, because they ate the fruit and they didn't physically die, but they got cut off from a source of spiritual life. The experience was like being cast out of the Garden of Eden. So they could not exist in that environment because of some mistakes which they had made. Traditionally, and most interpretations, especially in the Christian world, are that this was an act of disobedience. But would generation after generation be punished just for two people's disobedience against God? It seems very harsh, doesn't it? So Father Moon's understanding was this is a metaphor, actually. This fruit that's being talked about is very much a metaphor. Certainly, yes, it's to do with disobedience, that eating the fruit. But is it a test of obedience just from God? No. No loving parent would test their children that way with a poisonous fruit or something, right? Just to see if you will obey me or not. So it's not satisfactory, really. So, and also this fruit, if we follow the story, then it's more desirable to these first ancestors than even life itself. Because the threat is that if you eat of it, you will die, and yet they still ate of it. Right? So it was that tempting, or that kind of appealing. So what is it? Well, Father Moon's insight that he brought before God in his prayer was that this actually is love itself. This fruit refers to love itself, especially the holy husband-wife relationship, that aspect of love within a couple or within a family. Does that make a good analogy? Yeah. If we think about it that way? Interestingly, I was just researching the other day how many other religious traditions or denominations, including Judaism and others, think of it this way. None. It just said the only one is unificationism and the thought of Father Moon. Isn't that interesting? But is it this is for you to think about, is it a helpful way to understand this? It's very much a myth or a story, isn't it? Yes, but we had this unusual name of a tree, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, to know, biblically, the verb know is used to describe having sexual relationship. So you have in the Christmas story, right? Little ones that are primary school children enact, right? It says that Joseph was betrothed to Mary or engaged to Mary, but he did not know her. Right? So they had no relationship with each other. They were waiting for their marriage. To bear fruit is also to produce a result, which is to pass on through your lineage. That is the fruit of any marriage and marriage relationship, is the children that are produced. If they're coming from parents who are not spiritually mature, then that's not a good start, right? It's already difficult. So this is the understanding which is included in Father Moon's thought. That is, Adam and Eve there were growing towards their own perfection, which is largely, you can think of life growing up as 3 stages, if you think of it that way. They were somewhere at the top of the growth stage, like adolescence, where it actually becomes slightly difficult in life, right? 16, 17, this kind of age. You're wrestling with new things and new feelings, and, it's very easy to be tempted by the wrong thing at that age. So they were approaching that age, never went through that final stage, which is like uncharted territory for humankind, a stage of spiritual development, and they fell. But that prohibition, do not eat of the fruit of the tree, etc., was not like just a harsh, uncaring demand, but a very loving parental bit of advice, right? In other words, don't engage that kind of relationship before it's time to do so, and in the appropriate place and the appropriate setting when you are mature and when God can bless that marriage, right? This is it. So this is the story. Of course, somewhere this is partly known in the practice of religious communities and in some of those quotations which we said about how adultery is regarded as such a sin. But it's like the religious world never put these ideas really together. And this is not to take away from anything that people have understood until now, right? It actually doesn't contradict it, but it adds to it. It's like a new insight, and that's the power of these ideas within unificationism. So this is saying that during this growing period to spiritual maturity, go by this prohibition, do not eat, do not engage with that aspect of love. But under God's blessing, when you're time for marriage, then you are free to eat. Right? You can enjoy that. So here's a summary where Father Moon is talking. 1995, a speech called Religion and the Ideal World. What's the reality of our world today? Disorder and sickness of every kind, including war, violence, and drug abuse, have infected humankind. More important, the rapid collapse of sexual morality among the young, the increasing divorce rate, the breakdown of the family, are all destroying the foundation of human society. All these things originate from the fall. Do you remember we had a little definition of true love before? One of them. True, genuine love is unconditionally caring about the happiness of another person. Well, this is somewhere saying that conditional or false or imitation love is I care how you make me feel. That's the guiding principle. You know? So a person may say, I love you, or I've fallen in love with you, I just, you're the woman of my dreams, whatever, whatever they're saying, but they might be, if they're a self-centered person, they're saying, I care how you make me feel. And it's my feeling that I'm more interested in. So if a person is finding it, is maybe not responding, or perhaps they're critical, suddenly I don't love you anymore, right? That love disappears very quickly. And then we see how people, and this is a common part of this sickness, I think, they go through, in their growing years before maybe settling down, and whether they marry or not is a question, they'll go through a series of relationships. Right? And some people, maybe it's more a man's fault than a woman's, I don't know, but they will fall in love with falling in love. It's that experience which they like. So once it happened with one person, then after a while I get bored and I want to have that with another person. I want that experience of falling in love again. And I couldn't help myself, or I couldn't stop myself, or, But yeah, people use this kind of language. Yeah, absolutely, and I've heard that too. And there's some, people will use this as an excuse, but using it as an excuse, like I couldn't help myself, I don't know what came over me, and they committed adultery, and that's going to destroy that relationship, that is a sign of, actually, I'm not mature myself. I'm not able to control my feelings. I'm not able to, understand and practice love in a true way, which in the end will be much more fulfilling and much more lasting. I wouldn't then go looking for the next and the next and the next and become a kind of serial lover in that way. Am I being too open and too... I don't know. I might get a telling off from Margaret afterwards. I have to watch. Yeah, I'm being very open and honest with you, because it's a huge insight, actually, and it underpins a lot of the work we do for positive work for marriage and family, and for relationships, and for helping young people navigate through what is a very difficult scene in current society, right? So I came across another author, which, just to show that, other people are thinking this way. This movement isn't going to provide all the answers, or be able to do all this work. But I came across the writer, whom I respect a lot, Eckhart Tolle. He wrote a book called A New Earth, Create a Better Life. And he said there, what is commonly called falling in love is in most cases, not every case. I mean, I think the way my parents fell in love is a wonderful way, right? And I'm very glad that they did, right? So I'm not criticizing it generally, but what is commonly called falling in love is in most cases an intensification of self-centered wanting and needing. Are you with me? It's okay. Shall I read that again, because it's so important? Is that okay? Yeah. I see. She's just helping with a spillage, a little spillage. Not to worry. So this is Eckhart Tolle. He said, what is commonly called falling in love is in most cases an intensification of self-centered wanting and needing. You become addicted to another person, or rather to your image of that person. It has nothing to do with true love, he uses that phrase, which contains no wanting whatsoever. So this is why our real kind of, maybe it's our topic of the day actually, right? Is about true love versus false love. And love is not talked enough about in this society actually, because love is that process which is there in all relationships, not just romantic relationship between, two people. It's love is how we relate, with how we take care of people, how we treat people properly, how we, express our humanity. This is love, actually. It should characterize every relationship, even business relationships, should be done from this, with some thought of the other person. I'm not there to rip the other person off, I'm there to actually help them and some mutual benefit, and then everything progresses. So this is, So remember our 3 foundations for peace. Individual peace, we talked about, peace in family and society, and then universal peace through creating a harmonious world in our environment with true ownership and responsible stewardship in that way. So what we see, even though this is the original ideal, is that we've kind of inherited a corrupted version of this, where there is mind-body conflict, and that problem brings problems into a marriage. So if a person is self-centered, they've fallen in love with another person, do they want that self-centered nature to be exposed? No, they'll hide it, right? But in marriage, because of the nature of marriage, if they enter that marriage with that self-centered nature, it's going to emerge at some stage, for sure. It's going to be made known. It's going to raise its ugly head, we can say, right? So it's like bringing your problems into a marriage relationship, and then it's already a difficult start. And we don't often think this way, actually. We think the problems are in the marriage or just between the two people. But the question is, what kind of person am I bringing into the marriage? This person called me, right? What am I like? So this means it results in conflicts in society, and wars, originate from this conflict. And as a result, we see there's no care for the environment, environmental damage, misuse of science and technology, etc. And we see that there's a trend which is non-constructive or destructive trend going on. Okay, so in religious terms, we talk about this process as the fall, right? The result of the fall. Adam and Eve fell, this kind of language. Here's, again, a version of unification principles in a home study course, and I find this helpful as a little explanation. A result of the fall. To state that the world is under evil influences is to suggest that there are negative spiritual forces operating in our lives. Does that sound reasonable? Very. There are negative spiritual forces. If we... The previous one? Ah, yes. You're going to take a picture. Shall I smile? All right? Come on, take your pictures, everybody. I'll give you the slides afterwards. You don't have to worry. Right? Okay. So to state that the world is under evil influences is to suggest there are negative spiritual forces operating in our lives. Such influences can affect a person only as long as he or she cooperates with them. Right? So we're actually making a base. We're spiritual beings. We make a base with these spiritual influences, good ones or bad ones. Right? This is something we're not always so aware of. Sin may be thought of as any act or thought which violates God's law and which inhibits negatively our own growth to perfection. So sin is thus never simply against God. It's also against ourselves in that it violates our own deepest essence. Out of Father Moon's teaching, and it's how it's arrived at, I won't go into today, and that's available in other seminars. But it's saying that what we've inherited from whatever this fall was, we inherited down through our human lineage certain tendencies. It's described as 4 fallen natures, or 4 aspects of a fallen nature, not our original true nature. So these are, first of all, not loving people as God loves them, and not seeing situations as God sees them. Right? We've lost that perspective, because being cut off from that source means we've lost that kind of way of looking at others and way of looking at life itself. The second is a tendency to neglect our own responsibility and seek a position or role that rightfully belongs to others. And out of this comes all the kind of feelings of jealousy or envy or other things that people suffer from. But the third is a tendency again. It's just like, we can slip into this quite easily. To go the opposite way is quite difficult. It's seeking to dominate others whom we should respect and cooperate with, behaving unrighteously and disrupting the proper order. There's a tendency to do this. And finally, we seek to justify our own wrongdoings, to shift the blame, and to encourage others to join in that same evil behavior. So all these aspects are derived from his studying this original story and praying about it and almost kind of living through every moment through his spiritual experiences, and understood this is a tendency for us. If I'm talking to a group of Pentecostal ministers, I say this is getting under the skin of sin, right? And they usually like that expression, right? Why? Why? Because traditionally we thought of as sin in terms of concepts like jealousy, envy, anger. Yeah, it's absolutely right. We're identifying it, and you usually need a story to kind of illustrate it, not just a dictionary definition, right? So we have these, 7 deadly sins, or however many. We have, different names, lust or concupiscence or obsequiousness, all kinds of concepts. But this is almost saying, this is how those things arise. This is where they come from. They come from somewhere. And that is a new level of understanding. It's going deeply, as I said, under the skin of sin, literally, to explain. So it's a very useful tool, I would say, right? Yeah. Now, simply put, I gave those, it was more an explanation. It's not loving from God's standpoint, not loving others, leaving one's proper position, certain responsibility or role in the family or something like that. Obviously, if a man commits adultery, he's leaving his father's position, he's leaving his husband position, right? He's leaving his proper position within that family. And then you reverse the order of dominion. You actually upset things totally. And you also seek to multiply evil because you try to justify yourself and you try to involve others in this kind of thing. So let me give a somewhat light-hearted example. But imagine you are in an office. You work in an office, right? And a job opportunity opens up for the kind of higher rank in the office. And there's you and there's somebody else who definitely want that job. It's a little more status, it's a little more salary perhaps, and you've been working a long time, and you both have your eye on that job and think, yes, I could do that. So If one person maybe takes the view, well, I've worked here a long time, I'll let the management decide. If they're happy with my work, maybe they'll, ask me for an interview and we'll see what we can do, and I'd be happy to accept if I were asked. Fine. Another person thinks, hey, this job is mine, right? I want this job, right? So they start with a self-centered viewpoint, actually. Now that, nobody can tell that. You couldn't tell if I was having a self-centered thought, right? I don't know what to think, but anyway, self-centered viewpoint is not made known to anybody. It's inside your mind. So it starts in the mind, but then this person perhaps thinks a lot about this and starts scheming. So they spend time at their desk thinking, how can I get this job? What can I do, right? So they're already neglecting their own responsibility, and they're also believing themselves to be better than others. Have you met such a person? Right? Somebody who in a committee, for example, they always think their opinion is best. If their opinion isn't followed, they get upset. Is my opinion always best? I don't think so. No, maybe somebody has a better opinion than me, but there are some who can't entertain that idea, right? So neglecting your own responsibility, believing yourself to be better than others, this is starting for that self-centered thought to get turned into action. You're starting to think, what can I do? And then maybe you start, if you're this not such a good person who's trying to get this job, you start to put the other person down. You like spread a rumor, right? It might say, don't tell the boss this, but this other person said something terrible about him, Yeah, don't tell him. Of course, they're saying don't tell him, but they mean please tell him, right? Let it get back, right? So they're putting a little spin on this, and they're saying something which may be not true, and they're putting others down to win favor for themselves and increase their own chances. This is the kind of scheming. So this is now causing harm to others. What started just a self-centered thought has now become something which is hurting other people. And then they might even get others to back them up. They say, yeah, now when I'm in the job, when I get it, I'll make sure that you're well taken care of. Maybe even recommend you for a raise. Just support me, put in a good word for me. This kind of, do people do things like this? Yeah, they do, don't they, right? Do you think our leaders of our country sometimes do this? Political leaders? Or they are above this? I don't know. Right? So this is all to do with feeling justified, and then as it matures, this kind of fallen nature, you're getting others to do your own dirty work so that nothing traces back to you, right? It wasn't me. No, these other people said that or did this or, This is scheming. Now, writ large, this fallen nature produces the dictators of the world, right? The people who need food tasters in order to make sure nobody's trying to poison them. This kind of person, and who just eliminate their enemies. Anybody who dares cross them finds that they are just taken away in the night. We have been through this and are going through this even today. But because of our theme, which is peace starts with me, right? And the general religious point of view is before I accuse others and the world out there, I have to look inside myself, right? So I have to think, in what way am I subject to those aspects of fallen nature? Am I, somewhere not taking the right viewpoint and judging some other people from a self-centered perspective, and in order to make myself feel a little bit better or better in the eyes of others? Sometimes we can find ourselves doing that. I can certainly spot myself, sometimes doing that. And I find sometimes I laugh at myself. That's a good way out. Yeah? You think, oh, you're ridiculous. What are you trying to do, right? Just pull yourself together and just think of the other people, right? So it's an invaluable tool, this understanding. But I may want to find fault with other people, but rather let me look within and examine myself. That's the proper way to do it. Although it gives you a way to look at situations and look at dynamics of relationships or what's going on and analyze it quite helpfully, actually. So, we can study this more at some time. Everybody okay so far?
Yes.
Why the pointing finger? So rather than pointing fingers, right, as the Chinese adage says, when you point at somebody, 3 fingers point at you, right? So they're pointing back at you. So, look to yourself, first of all, in a way it's saying, right? It's just that's why I illustrated it that way. So we need to bring peace and reconciliation. Where does peace begin?
In me.
Actually, even you go to a rather unspiritual source, like this is the preamble to the Constitution of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO. It says there, since wars begin in the minds of men, it probably is predominantly men, to be honest, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. It's a battle of the mind, isn't it? As we were saying earlier, it's a battle of the mind. And religion is very much what we call a restorative vehicle. It's there to put things right. Father Moon, myself too, I would echo, it's not an end in itself. That's a mistake often people make. If you make that mistake, you end up being more and more fundamentalist, whatever faith or whatever area you're working in. No, it's a means to an end to put things right. Right? Why throughout history have people needed to improve themselves through morals, ethics, and religion? Why should we observe them? It's because we sense something is wrong with us, and we desire to turn to our original standing before God. We're trying to get back home in that way, right? And stand as we should. So religion operates in this way to help us on this journey back from our fallen situation. But that involves changing our nature. Is that an easy thing to do? Is it easy to make improvements in my own internal life, inner life? It's not easy, huh? Absolutely. And we have something which is needed. We call it a payment of indemnity in this particular philosophy. Well, it's just a use of a word, but it means some price has to be paid to go the opposite way to how things went wrong. So if you have an original position or status that gets lost, it could even be your health. If it's lost, you have a certain current reality, and that has to be restored. If you have perhaps you've have a good relationship with somebody, but then you lie to a friend and that lie is exposed. That friend loses trust in you and they say, I don't want you as a friend anymore. That's very painful. And you feel, well, I value that friendship and I've messed it up. You have to make some steps to recover that. It's not just for the other person to forgive you. You have to do something to win back that trust, right? And it may take time, understandably. So time is part of that process. So this payment of indemnity and this aspect of what we call restoration in this understanding is a conscious effort to restore what was lost and taking responsibility to correct your misconduct and going the reverse way to how that damage came about. So this is often the way that religion uses, actually, and certainly shows us through its key stories and key scriptures. So what is restoration? Restoration is an opportunity. It's when an opportunity comes around to put right past mistakes. That will bring about restoration. We should welcome it in that respect, huh? And it's giving in to the same temptations will only continue a destructive pattern, but in a way I'm saying, no, it stops here with me. I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to change the course of this particular history. And you make a conscious decision not to do so, not to give in to those same temptations. So you follow your conscience rather than repeating mistakes of the fallen nature. You make a distance from your own fallen nature, these tendencies that we looked at, and you identify them and you take a step away from them, and you follow your conscience. In doing so, you can break the cycle of abuse and the pattern of fallen history, actually. And until restoration on a particular level is accomplished, those same problems are going to reoccur, and they will reoccur, right? So this is why, of course, it's not an easy task to be in the restoration business, right? And reconciliation business and peacemaking business. But this is what we have to do, and this is very much informing the activities of UPF and the theory behind a lot of the things that we do. So this is like aspects for restoration. For example, we had a series through especially Women's Federation for World Peace of beautiful Bridge of Peace ceremonies, right? These were choosing women, like there was a major one in America, American women and Japanese women, right? And they were matched together by a kind of lottery, and they would come over a bridge and meet each other, beautiful bridge decorated with flowers in the hall, right? And would meet each other, and they would make, in that way, like friendships or pen pals, or be able to feel a sister relationship from former enemy countries, right? Yeah. And then, it sounds so simple, but when they went off and talked with each other, these two people who previously didn't know each other, they would find out things about their past, you know. My grandfather fought in the war, and he was fighting Japanese. And this, you know, we always had this viewpoint or this kind of image in our mind when we were growing up, and this and this and this, and realize very tearfully how, you know, both sides suffering and in need of restoring. And they would embrace and sometimes discover very amazing things about their shared history, right? There was a time, this is maybe not the time for storytelling, but I have to say it. Do you remember President George Bush, the elder? Yeah. Not George W., but his father. Very lovely man, very wonderful man. And he came to with his wife Barbara, he came to one of these Bridge of Peace ceremonies organized in Washington, D.C. And afterwards, I wasn't there myself, but my good friend and colleague Mark Brown was there, and said that afterwards, George Bush, President of the United States, I mean former president, but they still retain that title, President of the United States, was wandering around people saying, with tears in his eyes, I'm free, you know? And you're wondering, what's he doing? You know? Yeah, because he was in the military, in the Air Force, I believe, at the time, you know, bombing Japanese, troops, right? And he said, even though I couldn't speak about it in my public diplomatic life, it always bothered me because I had this resentment. And I couldn't let it be known, right? So this was like a personal struggle in his heart. But he said, through this ceremony and through this work, I overcame that. Yeah? So we all have these things that we need to overcome. We need restoration, right? So until restoration on a particular level is accomplished, the same problems will reoccur, right? Yeah. So there are two steps in religion to overcome this. First is to reconcile with God or the higher values that we espouse to. That might mean study of scripture, seeking insight, prayer and meditation, self-reflection, all these practices, right? Different ways of doing it, different styles. Yes, but it's for the same end, awakening the conscience. And there might be some kind of necessary confession involved, or somehow something to help restore love and trust in my relationship with God. Some person might choose a celibate path or poverty and obedience, like a monk's life. It's all kind of to do with trying to re-establish that vertical connection. And in this way, I'm aligning with God's word or higher values, and I'm undergoing a lot of internal self-reflection and awakening the conscience. But that's not enough. We also need to restore our horizontal relationships, which is reconciling brother and brother or sister and sister. This is ensuring that proper order exists in relationship with other people, and success in both areas is needed to be able to move closer to the goal of peace. So, we'll find that in the Holy Quran, for example. It says the repayment of a bad action is one equivalent to it. That's restoration. Right? But whoever pardons and makes reconciliation, his reward lies with God. He does not love the unjust, but whoever endures patiently and forgives, that is a sign of real resolve. There's a story from Jesus in Matthew. He says, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. So these two aspects are there. You just think of you're going to get kind of some blessings from God by doing this or doing that. No, it's not like that. Go and resolve this problem with your brother. He has something against you, right? And maybe you didn't fully realize. Once then, you're more easily accepted. If you look then, this may be familiar to some, at Jesus' central teaching, which has Jewish origins, of course. He was asked to say, what's the most important law of all the laws, in the Torah or the Old Testament, as we call it. And he could pick it out. Of course, it's a verse much loved and said every day by Jews. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, or all your strength. Might, different translations. What is that? That's this vertical aspect. Yeah, we call it making a foundation of faith we need to do and put that right. Okay, so that's the greatest. But then he said, and the second is this, because you can't have one without the other. And then he said, the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. In both cases, he was quoting from the Torah, from Deuteronomy and then from Leviticus. It's a little harder to find in Leviticus. It's buried rather deeply. But he said, love your neighbor as yourself. Understand how much God loves you and love yourself accordingly. And then love other people, your neighbor. That means a real person, your neighbor, right? So love that person as you do yourself. And that's establishing the proper horizontal order. So vertical and horizontal, these two things. And again, quite a few quotes from the Holy Quran, right? And be steadfast in prayer and regular in charity. Steadfast in prayer is the vertical, right? Regular in charity, you're helping and caring for other people. This is the horizontal, right? So we need both of these. And whatever good you send forth for your souls before you, you shall find it with Allah. So there was conflict. In the biblical story, we see conflict in the first family. Right? Adam and Eve fell through eating the fruit, through their premature sexual relationship, actually. And that was through engaging in illicit love and inheriting that fallen nature. And we looked at 4 aspects of that. Wow. And then that's the parents' problem. The parents' problem is immediately visited upon the children, upon the next generation. And we have a struggle between the sons Cain and Abel, Cain the elder, Abel the younger, and this emerges in this story as the first murder of, one person by another. I mean, in human history, there must have been a first murder sometime. The first time a person we could call human beings killed somebody else in an unrighteous way. That must have happened. And it sets a pattern. That's the unfortunate thing. So this becomes an archetype of conflict. That's why Father Moon felt to use this story and to make it almost like a universal lesson. God certainly wanted Cain and Abel to love each other. It happens that they're asked to make an offering. Do you know that story, everybody? They're asked to make an offering. Abel's offering is accepted because he's considered a righteous person, and he's obviously very faithful. Cain's offering is not accepted by God, and he feels downhearted, miserable, dejected, angry, bitter, resentful, and he even starts to blame his brother. Why is yours accepted and mine isn't? All these kind of feelings that we can now recognize as fallen nature, right? Come up in him. In a way, through this acceptance or rejection of the offerings, Cain is forced to deal with these feelings and put in a position to feel all that in the original story, the archangel felt towards Adam. But what does God say? Anybody with a kind of psychology interest or that kind of area? Because I find this very fascinating. This is Genesis 4. It's God saying to Cain, when Cain is so miserable, right, and downhearted, it has God saying, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Wow, right? Why are you so glum? If you do what is right, which is what we should be doing, won't you be accepted? In other words, I'm ready to embrace you. Right? We're not being cast out or judged or sent to hell or something. No. We want to embrace you. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It's ready to pounce. Right? Its desire is for you, but you must master it. In other words, get a grip on yourself, on these feelings in yourself. Make a separation from those feelings and rid yourself of those, and then you'll be embraced. And God wants to see the unity of those brothers and accept them both. So when you look at the story more deeply, it's very fascinating. Bit of kind of psychological guidance going on there, right? If Cain were to listen to it. So this becomes an archetype of conflict because Abel certainly loved God but couldn't win the heart of his brother, or maybe have enough concern for his brother who was consumed with resentment as part of his job to help. And Abel certainly had God's blessing, was approved, but didn't share it or help his brother. Perhaps he could have seen his brother's difficulty and said, can I help you? Or, do you want a hand with this? If he would be accepted, we don't know, but, that should be the heart. And Cain, on the other hand, was consumed with resentment over this perceived injustice. And he did not see his brother from God's point of view. Wasn't that the first aspect of the fallen nature, right? He didn't see his brother. Why is my brother's offering accepted? What is it that he's doing right? What does God like about it? Let me go and ask him. I think maybe I need your help. To do that, it takes a bit of what? A bit of humility, right? So all these things in the restorative kind of arsenal of things need to be employed and to be able to go the right way. But he was unable to control his anger, and he murdered his brother. Wow, this is how we go down those steps, and it becomes something very tragic. So, most murderers think, I'm going to get rid of this person and all my problems will go away. But is that it? It's the start. Yes, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's the start of your problems. If you make it that substantial, right? There's one thing to feel these things, but if it then takes physical course of action, it's very, very damaging, right? So Abel, what should happen? He should be humble, being accepted by God. He should forgive and be tolerant in the face of abuse. Maybe his brother said a few angry words, but, that's all right. He should serve his brother in order to melt his resentment and show that there's a better way. He should be ready to help his brother to be successful, right? How often do we see that in our society, that people are envious of others' success? They want to bring them down. As soon as somebody's in a position, they want to bring them down, right? That's the nature of, I see a lot of that, right, going on. And Cain has to overcome resentment and feelings of rejection. This is a very dangerous feeling, the kind of, poor me, the kind of lack of love feeling. He has to recognize his brother's value. He must have done something right that I can learn from. He should rejoice in his brother's success, which is actually a very good thing to do. And he should move on from hatred and be ready to reconcile. Right? Now, in this analysis of Old Testament stories in Father Moon's teaching, it then goes on through various families and various Old Testament stories, which he relived in his prayer and his deep research, and got many, many insights, not in the way that, of course, have been done over centuries with, sermons and using this material for guidance, but really exposing what are the principles at work in terms of restoration, how God sets up a situation after situation in order to have the main players overcome something significant and separate their lineage from those feelings. So the latest story is actually in the third generation of Abraham's family, Esau and Jacob's story, where this problem of brothers is actually overcome. So it's solving the Cain-Abel conflict, but now in a much later period. Also between two brothers who are twins, but Esau is very slightly the elder and feels outdone of his blessing through the scheming of Jacob and his mother in particular. So, there's a big story there, which I won't go into. But Esau overcomes his fallen nature. He comes to love Jacob from God's standpoint. And he does it because Jacob plans a way to do this by going to meet his brother, even though he knows his brother is still full of anger. He goes to meet his brother and bows down along the way as he sees him in the distance. 7 times he bows to the ground. He sends ahead of him cattle and servants and all kind of material things, saying, this is yours, this is all for you. This is a way to win somebody's heart, isn't it, right? It's not a bad strategy, right? But it means he was ready to give everything. What he wanted more was reconcile with his brother. He'd been away for 21 years, away from his family because of this family feud. So we see, just to continue, he's going the reverse way of how that fallen nature works. He restores a true elder brother position. He no longer seeks to dominate unrighteously, and he's in a position to multiply goodness, which is peace, essentially. So there's peace in the family. So Father Moon uses this as a kind of typology, if you like. There's a Cain-Abel conflict. At the time of Jacob, then Jacob and Esau can resolve this on the family level. But at the time of Jesus, when Jesus is born, then there's a kind of Cain-type culture, which is Rome, and there's an Abel-type culture, which is Israel. Do you follow me? Israel based on the faith tradition, and it's very peace-loving. Rome based on a much more, brutal, militaristic way of life, and it's a slave culture, and its greatness comes from that. But internally, morally, it's not great compared to Israel. They need each other. There needs to be reconciliation at that time. And Father Moon's insight was it could have come about if Jesus had been accepted by the people who were waiting and expecting him to come, but they didn't. Unfortunately, rejected him. So we have this thread coming through one side of human history. We call it, at this point of time, Hebraism, and you have the other thread, which is Hellenism. They all trace back to Cain and Abel, actually, and in the way of dealing with things. It does not mean one is evil, one is good. That's much too simplistic. They're both good and bad, but they both need each other. And also, at the time, before Jesus, 400 to 600 years before Jesus, the world was going through many, many changes. This is where there were major developments in what's called the axial period. That is, you get Confucius, Lao Tzu, Buddha, Zoroaster, the Parsi religion, or Zoroastrianism. The Upanishads, a kind of reformation within Hinduism. You get Malachi, the last prophet, 400 years before Jesus in the Old Testament. Socrates and the Greek philosophers around that time. So it's all happening, right? That there's a transformation taking place. Getting ready, but getting ready for what? That's when the world could come together. If the message had been received by Judaism at that time that Jesus was bringing, can you imagine if he were allowed to live on and teach and die a natural death? 80, 90, right? And everything he said would be written down. And then, missionaries from his work would go out around the world. They'd reach Rome. Maybe he would preach and speak to 15,000 in the Colosseum in Rome, And then maybe other followers would go east. They'd meet Zoroastrians. They'd meet Buddhists. They'd meet, people from these different faiths already with their kind of spiritual foundation lifted up. Why? So that we can come together. They should have come together at that time, but in the last 2,000 years, they've carried on separately as traditions, and sometimes at odds with each other, very tragically. So this is a very interesting look at history. Again, more than we can do today, but it comes down to these two threads. They start to develop and mature, we can say, into Cain-type worldviews and Abel-type worldviews. And here I'll begin my kind of final little comment in this session. Right? So it's using that language, which has a biblical source, but it's saying there are two views of life, and they're current today. One is more Abel type, one is more Cain type. Right? Isn't it true that almost on every topic of discussion that you come across, there are kind of two opposing views? They're also quite well argued on both sides. Whether it's a current one, which is under scrutiny, is the idea of assisted dying, right? Or it's abortion, or these kind of large ethical questions in particular have two strong sides to them. They come from these two traditions. Now, both of those have good elements, and they need to find a unity. There needs to be a coming together of these two. So this helpful typology is something like this. Remember, brothers must unite and go together the way of goodness. So Cain should come through Abel back to unity centered on goodness or a common purpose, or we can say peace, or we can say God, right? So not only that, but we talked about this as the struggle between body and mind. Well, in that struggle, body is like Cain and mind is like Abel, right? Has these kind of ways of thinking and acting. In any religious path, and I just chose a kind of universal word of a devotee and a guru, right? If you have the guru, this is like Abel. And other people, by following and coming, and we talk about following, they come through the teaching of that enlightened person to a higher level of peace and understanding. So they are like Cain coming through Abel back to God. Communism is the more Cain-type view. It's easily prone, even promoting violence as part of the solution, but it needs to come through democracy to be able to be reconciled so these two brothers can be embraced and create peace. Any issue, as I said, is divided between a more Cain-type view and a more Abel-type view, and others in between, of course. So, do you follow me? So it's a helpful way of understanding the strands and the ways of thinking and approaching problems, and this is our task in UPF, is to bring about this kind of unity between these various factions and sides. So this is all contained in Sun Myung Moon's philosophy of peace, which blends individual elements and familial elements, the importance of the family, and global elements, how to win over and create a harmonious worldwide ideology, if you like, a new ideology, Actually, he had a name for this new ideology. Do you know what that was? He had a couple of names. One was Godism, and the other is parentism, maybe depending on his audience, right? So, yes, we need to rediscover something. We're not quite at the end of that journey yet, right? We're still in the kind of warring brother stage in human society, and still going on, even though we think communism collapsed and that time went and the Iron Curtain came down, but still there are things. We have problems of cultural Marxism in our society and ways of trying to create division and cause conflict. So we look to the wise, right? Here is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, we must discover the power of love, the redemptive power of love. And when we discover that, we will be able to make of this old world a new world. We will be able to make men better. Love is the only way. Amen. Wow, he could have known what we were talking about all day, couldn't he? Huh? And also he said, we never get rid of an enemy by meeting hate with hate. We get rid of an enemy by getting rid of enmity. That has to be removed. And final quotation belongs to UPF founder. I am teaching you to love those who hate you. If you love them, sooner or later they will come to like you. If you return good 3 times, for every time someone does you wrong, eventually that person will bow his head. Try it yourself and see if I am right or not. Everyone has a conscience. Amen. So thank you very much, everybody. Let's take a break.
Can I say something?
MC.
We have
Because of the online people.
3:20. So we're supposed to have a refreshment break now.
3:20. Can you see?
They're outside, yeah. How about we take a break now until 3:45?
What time?
Just check on this.
Yeah, I think. So let's be back here at 3:45. It's 3:20 now. 3:20.